The Galapagos Island is named after the large tortoises that inhabit that place. Galapagos Island is itself a volcanic island which is distributed around the equator in the Pacific Ocean west of continental equator. An archipelago is something which is a chain or cluster of islands. So Galapagos Islands are also the same. They're kind of archipelago. It means they are all small cluster of islands which are distributed in the Pacific Ocean, and in each of the places, like each of the small islands, there is a different kind of climatic condition and different evolutionary phenomena occurs in each of the places, as because those 29 stretch of Galapagos small islands in the Galapagos, they all are distributed in the same region, but everywhere the evolution is taking place in an isolated area. That's why the species which are inhabiting in all those islands, they can be considered as completely different from one another at times. And it was observed that finches, which were basically the American finches, the normal finches, they also showed similar kind of variation when they were seen in this geographical location. So, with this, we come to an understanding that all of the organisms that are present in this island, they have all reached from the South America, and just for search of food and survival, they all reached to Galapagos Island. Once they reached there, then they started evolving according to the climatic condition. So Darwin's finches were actually 14 species of small birds, 13 of which were found on the Galapagos Island, and this group of birds provides one of the most striking and best studied example of evolution on the islands. Scientists also have a very strong thinking that the Galapagos Island finches, they are the descendants from the ancestral species that originally inhabited in the main islands or main land of the South America. So they had came from there, and they started evolving. So as this island has presence of these small flocks of birds which occasionally reach that island, and they had no other idea that where to go next, so they started residing over there as immigrants. And then as the natural selection and genetic drift worked, so that's the way they started adapting themselves according to the climatic condition in that volcanic island. And as they started adapting themselves, they showed various variations. So if you see this, a common cactus finch and a medium ground finch, both of them, their hybrid is this another finch, which is a Warbler Finch. So this is how all of them, they started modifying themselves, or I should rather say that evolution started occurring in them according to the kind of climatic condition and their adaptations. You can see all these varieties of finches. Here, ancestral finch means the normal finch which came from the mainland of South America, and then these all different varieties of finches which started evolving. The first category, which is towards my two, you can see insect eating finches, the finches which started eating insects, their beaks, they started developing in such a way that they can pick up the insect and feed on it. So this ground finch, warbler finch, the insect eating finch, is known as a warbler finch, and this unusual bird differs from the ground finches and the tree finches in the habit, the morphological adaptation, and as well as these play a very significant role in understanding that they need to have a very slender beak so that they can pick up an insect and feed on it. At the same time, the another category of finches which we have seen in the diagram is the cactus finch. Now, what does this cactus finch exactly mean? They were the ones which were feeding on the cactus sap of the cactus, or at times the fruit of the cactus. They were feeding themselves on that, and that's why they grew, or they developed in such a way that their beaks will be as such that they can split their tongue and take out the nectar from the flowers of the cactus, because it's a volcanic island, and over there you won't those finches, they won't find various types of plant and flowers over where they can feed and grow. So the beaks, they started becoming very long and straight. If the beak is long and straight, then the tongue can split itself in such a way so that the nectar from the flowers can be taken up by the tongue, and beak can penetrate inside the flowers. So this was the modification for the cactus finch. Next category of finches were the seed eating finches. So the normal sparrows which we see in our household or nearby area, those all are the best examples of these seed finches, or seed eating finches. You can see what it is written: sharp beaked ground finches, small ground finches, large ground finches, and medium ground finches. So all these seed eating finches, they all developed into ground finches. They all had almost 6 categories, and all these 6 categories of ground finches, they all started developing on their own. And generally, these all finches, they used to feed on seeds of any kind of uh, seeds of most of the plants, and most of the plants seeds of most of the plants, they started feeding on it. The size of the beak is sometimes medium, sometimes little slender, sometimes it's very sharp, so depending on what kind of seed it is feeding on. Sometimes when they are feeding on small seeds, like rice type of seeds, then the beak is like our normal sparrow. But when it is feeding on walnuts and such kind of seeds, then the beak has to be very strong, like it has to be developed. So over there we saw that next category, that is the woodpecker finch, started evolving from the seed eating finches. So you can move on to the next category where tool use is written: mangrove finch and the woodpecker finch. This woodpecker finch, it required to it had a very strong beak which was long and so that it can dig into the trees bark, and then from there it can extract the insects and feed on them. Sometimes sometimes these woodpecker finches, they also feed on insects from the other areas, and as such also these woodpecker finches, we can consider them as the present day woodpeckers ancestors. So this is how evolution is actually taking place. It's not that each of the bird, they are having they are just formed as such. They all have developed and matured themselves and evolved themselves in the way they look right now. So for peacock and for other you know birds, you can think that that is how evolution is taking place. It is a very steady and slow process. It's not something which is taking place very quick. You'll not even realize, and in your locality some evolution is taking place every day. So we have to be very observant in order to determine that where this evolution is occurring. Now the next category, these are the tool use finches, or the finches which had developed their teeth in such a way, not the teeth, the beak, in such a way that they beaks were like tools for them. The next category is for the, again, insect eating finches. So large insectivorous tree finch, you can see the beak is very short and slender, and it is capable of eating finches, like small insects from the trees. These all are modifications of tree finches. Basically, tree finches were also of six categories. Only three are shown over here, three more were there. So, six varieties of tree finches were there, and they all diverged independently. These species also differ from one another if you see their beaks properly, because the shape of the beak for each of them is completely different from another one, as because are their feeding habit is completely different. So beak is dependent on the kind of food they are eating, and beak is getting modified so that the kind of food they are eating, it is completely uh, specific, right? So basically, four species have beaks that are suitable for feeding on insects, and the ones with larger beaks, they feed on larger insects, for example earthworms and all. And those three of the smaller beak size, they feed on the small insects. One of the tree finch has a parrot like beak, and this parrot like beak is definitely a finch which is not feeding on insects. It is a kind of vegetarian finch which feeds on buds and fruit which is present on various trees. The last category, or the sixth category of the tree finch, is a woodpecker finch, or and has a beak like a chisel. So these unusual birds, they carry the twig in their, mouth, and this twig is a cactus spine, which is used as a kind of the way if there is an insect which is lying in the floor, we want to lift it up and we put a paper over it. Similarly, this cactus is used the similar way. The spine of the cactus is used in the similar way by this cactus or spin. Cactus spine is used like a paper so that the insect will crawl on that spine, and finally the woodpecker finch will, eat it. So this is just a kind of modification, and how the animal is using its intelligence in order to catch the insects, their prey basically. So why was, first question may arise, that why there was any need that this kind of adaptive radiation took place in the ancestral finch. Galapagos Island was a kind of completely isolated place, so their food supply was very minimal. So in order to survive, they all were supposed to eat food in a minimalist way. It won't be possible for them to survive. So that's why they all changed the food habit only. So if the food habit is changed, each of them they eat something completely different, so they can survive in the same island and they can increase their number. So with this idea, the Darwin's finches, they all evolved in a completely different way. And nowadays, if you see a warbler finch and a cactus finch, you will not be able to, say that they have a common ancestry. It is very difficult because the beak size and the entire body, the morphology, everything looks completely different. But if you study them properly, then we can find a very close, relation of each of them with one another. This is one of the example of adaptive radiation which is studied by Darwin, and he studied about it, and that gave us an idea that whenever there is a requirement for survival, the animals, they are adapting themselves according to the kind of environmental conditions in which they are present.